There's two parts of the brain that writers tend to work creatively, and I'm going to call one conceptual and one intuitive. The way the brain works is the conceptual and the intuitive sides can't be active at the same time. You suddenly give someone the ability to eat really great food. They're not going to go back to like the junk food. People who watch TV shows and movies are so educated and they've seen so much. They know what an original great story is and what isn't. You're born a unique and special person, and the people who love you, and you're an amazing person, and you don't have to achieve writing greatness to be a special person. But if you want to be special at something like writing, you're going to have to work your little ass off.
Corey Mandell, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Oh my goodness. This is like a dream come true to be talking to you because I have spent so much time doing your classes. So before we start, full disclosure, I have personally done 8 of the courses in your writing program. And even though I'd studied writing so many times before and done lots of really incredible courses, it was the way that you teach. It was the language, it was the craft coming together with the inspiration that fundamentally changed my understanding of storycraft. You've taught thousands of people across the world, including some of the most successful showrunners in Hollywood, Leslie Patterson, who recently won the Oscar for All Quiet on the Western Front. And I've recommended so many people to your classes. I'm sure there's a very strong Aussie contingent. And so it's a great opportunity for us to dig down into what you do and why the way you teach made such a difference to how I understand storycraft.
Thank you so much. That means a lot.
Let's start with the big picture. In your words, what makes a great story?
I think the best stories work on 2 levels. I think obviously there's, let's call it the top level, where there's something unique about this story that grabs our attention. Characters we absolutely want to spend time with. It's going somewhere and we want to go on that journey. The stakes matter to us. We absolutely have to see how this is going to play out. And it can hold our attention all the way to the end and deliver us to an ending that, at least meets, but hopefully exceeds our expectations. So that's the top part. And underneath, in ways we may not even be able to articulate, it's meaningful to us. It's somehow impactful to us and memorable. It was a joy to go on this journey, or maybe not a joy. Maybe it was a horror film or a thriller, and it was very, tense. Like I just finished watching Adolescence. I don't know that it was enjoyable, but it was just riveting. I was just so engrossed and like I couldn't breathe. But when it's done, again, probably for reasons we may not be able to describe, it really mattered. It was all worth it. That's that bottom level. And when you have both those levels working in concert with each other, then those are the absolute best stories.
Stakes that matter and matter to the character.
And matter to the audience, because, the stakes might matter to the character, but if they don't matter to us, we may not be as interested in reading the writer's script as they are hoping.
Wow, yes, that's a great definition. So where is it that most writers go wrong in terms of building a story? What have you seen? Because you teach this all the time. What are the errors we keep making?
So unfortunately, there's just a lot of classes and books out there that are teaching formulas, paradigms, and those work to a fair extent. The industry really changed with the streaming impact, like 7 years ago. And so many of these popular paradigms in film schools and books, they're like teaching writers how to fight a war that ended 7 years ago. So it's really important that writers understand that for a variety of reasons, any script that feels generic or predictable or kind of paint by the numbers is going to be ignored. But that doesn't mean then anything goes, right? So, the good news is there's never been so much demand for storytellers and for new storytellers. The other side of the equation is the bar's never been higher. So we're looking for scripts where when we read it, it feels organic, which is like these are real people. Like when you read Fleabag or Adolescence, or Breaking Bad or Anora, these feel like real people who are just doing what they would really do. Like there's never a sense of a writer moving them around a chessboard, or puppets. It just feels like you're a fly on the wall with real characters, real people. And yet everything they do is just captivating and more captivating. So It's a really hard thing to pull off. And unfortunately, a lot of writers, they don't even really begin to train themselves that way because they're just using paradigms or formulas. They're trying to copy how, like now that adolescence is getting so much accolades, there's going to be a lot of scripts that are going to be written that people are going to read it and they go, oh yeah, that's like that writer's version of adolescence. I don't care. That show's been done. It's amazing. I don't need someone else's version of it. Once you let go of the paradigms and the rules, then it's finding a way to learn the tools that you need to be able to create that organic story structure.
That was definitely a groundbreaking moment in your teaching, was how to really tap into that organic storytelling, really understand cause and effect, understand, escalating stakes, but also to have that truth, that like how you balance the inspiration and the craft, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's that integration. And that's really, I think, what makes like what I do different from a lot of people is I'm really looking for the integration of like, what is it that's most authentically interesting to you, but how are you going to do it in a way that's most authentically interesting to other people?
Yeah, yeah. And a real understanding of audience. The first thing you get students to do, or certainly did when I started training with you, is to read the talent code. That
Yeah.
is such a brilliant way to start the class. Why do you do that?
I'll answer that, but you go first. Why do you think it's a brilliant way to start the class?
Well, because I think we're an industry that has a fantasy about what talent is. And I think that a lot of us kind of grow up as kids who maybe have a propensity for drama. We're told, wow, you're so talented, you're so talented. But the problem with calling people talented is that it is a fantasy that you don't have to do really hard work. And one of my favorite quotes is people are rewarded in public for what they practice in private. And that's what you teach. You teach muscularity, getting on the tools, practicing, practicing, practicing.
As the talent code says very articulately, talent is repeatable skill sets. And those skill sets you can be born with them. It could just be natural. They could be something you, without realizing, just picked up through osmosis. Like I'll work with writers, their mom was an amazing playwright and their dad was an editor of books. So growing up, they're going to pick up a lot of things that, I didn't pick up growing up. My dad was an accountant at NASA and my mom worked at a big department store. Love my parents dearly, but, they weren't in the literary world. So you can pick up these skills through osmosis, or you could consciously, purposely say, I need to get better at this skill, or I need to get better at this skill. So it doesn't matter how you come about it. Talent is repeatable skill sets. So you can always grow your talent. And in America, it's even worse. The industry very much believes in this natural talent fantasy. I'll give you a perfect example. So, I made my living as a screenwriter for 11 years before I was teaching. And anyone in the industry, I got into UCLA Film School in the producers program. They made us write a script. To take the screenwriting class to write a script. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to be a producer, but they made you. So I took this screenwriting class. I didn't really know what I was doing. And I wrote this script and it ended up getting me a major agent. And 3 weeks later, I sold a pitch to Ridley Scott and I was a studio screenwriter for 11 years. It's a good story. It's not entirely true, but that would be my origin story. The truth is, I went to the producers program. They made me write a script. I wrote a script and it had some potential, but it had all the mistakes, that you make when you first start out. And I learned those mistakes and I wrote a second script that was somewhat better. And by my third script, it didn't completely suck. And then there was a fourth script and then someone really worked with me and really pushed my skill set and really showed me that I had weaknesses and how to turn those weaknesses into strength. And then that fifth script, which is 2 years later, got me the agent and the Ridley Scott deal. So I just took those 4 scripts out in my official story because the reason is the industry likes this idea that there are just people who just wake up one day and can do this. They're magicians. We love sexy stories, right? Like I just one day wanted to write a script. That weekend I went away, I wrote a script and I won the Academy Award. Like that gets people's attention as opposed to, well, it was 8 years of trying and failing and learning and inch by inch muscularly growing my talent. Everyone kind of cuts that out. And so what happens is you have a generation of writers who think, okay, I write a script or two. And if I have what it takes, I'll win an Academy Award. And if I don't, I'll go to law school, And so what talent code, it really debases you of that very detrimental, damaging fantasy. And that what I always tell writers is every writer has inherent strengths, weaknesses, and blind spots, which are weaknesses you don't necessarily know you have. Every writer has those. Smart writers find someone who can help them recognize their blind spots. So now all their weaknesses are known to them. And now what separates the writers who are going to go on to have careers and those who are going to be complaining perpetually about not having a career is, are you willing to relentlessly attack your weaknesses to turn them into strengths? And I'm not going to name them, but I know Academy Award winning writers. I know showrunners from the biggest shows ever. I know writers who I am in awe of the heights of their writing in their career. And I know where they started. And they started with some really amazing inherent strengths and some really terrible weaknesses and some huge blind spots that when it was pointed out to them, they were very shocked and discouraged and depressed for a while. So when I was in film school, like I had the Coen brothers on a pedestal. I just thought, well, the Coen brothers obviously just woke up one day and this is just how they operate. Or Tina Fey, I had her on a, same kind of pedestal. And I was fortunate enough to meet them and get to know them enough to know that, they started out right where I started out. What made them different from other people is they were fearless, they were smart, and they just said, I'm going to do the work however long it takes. And they just kept doing the work to get better and better. And some days you can't even feel you're getting better because it's so incremental. But if you just get a little bit better every day, every day, every day, you suddenly hit this tipping point where suddenly you or everyone else is like, oh my God, like it feels like overnight you suddenly blossomed. But it's really, as you're saying, all that private work. So yeah, I love as much as possible to try to heal people from this fantasy. Because it's also fear, like, right, if I'm going to write something and get feedback, I'm going to know if I have it or not. That's a scary place to be. And just, I always try to tell people to know, look, you have certain strengths that are amazing. You have certain weaknesses that are terrible, and you have blind spots. That's it. Don't be scared of it. Like, finding a weakness is a good thing because once you know it, you can attack it and you can strengthen it. And you keep doing that till you don't have weaknesses. And then you can finally start to write at the level you really want to be writing at.
Yeah, I think that relentless pursuit and, working with you, I also felt you give us basically workout skills. So in terms of being able to improve, these are practical ways, like your weightlifting, your understanding, and because you have such a clear way of describing the craft of writing while still really acknowledging the inspiration, it does feel like you're getting better. And it's more empowering than feeling at the mercy of like what talent you were born with, right?
Right. Also, I've worked with writers who they come to me and they're so close. And other writers will come to me and they're like, they got a lot of work ahead of them, and those writers get there first because sometimes the writers who are close, they're getting all this praise and they feel like, I'm just not in the right place at the right time. You know how the business works. Like at some point when you get there, you just got to keep writing scripts, and there is a being at the right place at the right time. So sometimes it's the writers who are the closest who take the longest because they get all this praise. The writers who have more work to do, they're usually know that and they're hungry. It's checking your ego at the door and just saying, look, it doesn't matter what level I'm at. Don't compare yourself to anybody. Just say, do I want to get better? I mean, I know and am working with some of the biggest showrunners, and every day they want to get better. Like their perspective is the day I wake up and say, I got it, I don't need to get any better, is the day to hang it up. That's the point of any art or creative endeavor, is just enjoy the journey, be compassionate to yourself, work your ass off, enjoy the work, and just every day, just try to get a little bit better, a little bit better. I always tell my writers, your competition is going to get better today. What are you going to do?
I love that. I am a self-confessed lifelong learner because also the ongoing journey of learning is really joyful. One of our best showrunners here in Australia, Tony Ayres, he calls us as creatives elite athletes. And I love that comparison too, because an athlete doesn't just wake up and go one day, oh, I'm good now. I've got my body where I want it to be. Like they have to practice every day. They have to keep in form.
Yeah. And, it's interesting you say that because Leslie and her husband came to work with me, and they're the ones who not that long. I have within 2 or 2.5 years won the Academy Award. I mean, Leslie was just like such a relentlessly hard worker. And not surprisingly, she was a world champion athlete before she got into writing. She is an athlete at the highest level and been trained that way. So she just took that mindset to writing. So it was not a surprise that she was able to just get there so quickly.
Yeah, amazing. So, one of the foundational elements of your teaching that you referred to earlier on is the creative integration and that belief that writing has these two components, the conceptual or the craft, and then your intuition. Can you explain to us what that means and how writers can apply this?
I'm really passionate about this because this concept, and I had a lot of help in kind of cracking this code. It's really been the cornerstone of all the success that my writers have had. So, we'll talk about it sort of at an overview, but anyone who wants more information, you can go to my website, and my website's coreymandell.net. Just go over to the right-hand side and there's thing says free stuff and click on that. And then there's some free resources and some not free resources, but on the free resources, there'll be something for creative integration if you want a more deep dive into it. I'll leave that up for at least 2 weeks after whenever this drops. But the overview of creative integration would be there's two parts of the brain that writers tend to work creatively. And I'm going to call one conceptual and one intuitive. And so the conceptual brain, it has a perpendicular processor. And all that means is that it knows it has a past, has a present, has a future. So that's the part of us that knows, hey, I'm writing something. I've written stuff in the past and I've gotten feedback that's felt good or felt bad, right? So you remember all that. And I know someone's going to read this hopefully at some point. I mean, there's a reason why I'm writing this. And so the conceptual mind is always aware of that. And so it's very, very focused on what other people are going to think. It's the part of us that is trying to make the writing good. And what good means is that when other people read it, they think this is funny or smart or original. They're going to think it's good, or maybe want to buy it or represent us, whatever it is we're hoping for. And conceptual writers tend to, when they work on projects, they tend to start with like a big premise, a commercial concept. That makes sense. And they're also very into stories, having like interesting things happen. They might have big twist ending or a lot of really interesting set pieces, comedic or dramatic or horrific, because really it's important to them that readers get interested and stay interested. So they want a lot of interesting, engaging stuff. And if you ever want to drive a conceptual writer like insane, like point out a plot hole and they'll go crazy trying to figure out how to fix this plot hole. Where they always fall short is with characters. And their characters feel in some way like they were created to serve the story because they were. And they're going to feel kind of like puppets. And their characters and the dialogue are just not going to have that richness and compellingness that it needs. And most of the time they know this. They don't know what to do about it. And there's another thing that often they fall short on that they may not know is they have all this interesting stuff, but they usually have too much interesting stuff. When I started out, I was a conceptual writer. And a producer said, your script is like 20 pounds of really interesting stuff in a 5-pound bag. Because I want to keep people interested, Julie. I don't want people being bored. So like, ooh, this is really interesting. And this is interesting. And this is interesting. So if I have all three things, it's 3 times as interesting. But no, it's just complicated. it's just overwhelming. It doesn't breathe. And the last thing with conceptual writers is we're not really feeling much because they probably weren't feeling that much when they wrote it. And again, conceptual writers can know this, but they don't know what to do about it. And we'll come back to that. Intuitive writers are the opposite. The intuitive part of the brain has a parallel processor. So there's no past, present, or future, just now, just right now. Like whenever you're just in the moment, that's the intuitive brain. You're just in the moment. And the intuitive brain doesn't care about anyone else. It just cares about you. It's just what is authentic to me, what matters to me, or the characters. What is real and interesting to me. That's what the intuitive brain is focused on. And intuitives, they don't tend to decide on characters or create characters. It's like they discover them and they're like real people. Intuitive writers emotionally bleed on the page. They feel what the characters are feeling. If I was having a conversation with a conceptual writer and it's like, hey, people read your script, your main character's not interesting enough, they'd be like, well, what do I need to do? Do I make her taller, change her sexual preference? Should she be a giraffe? Should she kill people? Like, just tell me what to do. But with an intuitive writer, if you say, yeah, people really aren't that interested in spending time with your character, they react as if you just said, hey, I heard the school just called and no one really likes your daughter very much. It's like really hurtful. They're not like, well, what do I need to do? Make my daughter taller or make her kill? It's really hard for them because these are like real people they love dearly. The problem is these characters are always in search of an interesting story that they can't find because the intuitive brain is terrible at stories. So these guys I grew up with came to LA and we spent like a weekend together. We just hung out and talked and reminisced and laughed. If I recorded the whole thing and played it to you right now, Julie, you'd be so bored in 3 seconds because you're like, it's just a bunch of guys that I don't really know that well talking about stuff. Nothing's happening. But for me, with hanging out with them, nothing needed to happen. I just love being with them, right? And that's how intuitive writers are with their scripts. That's why the intuitive writers don't get bored when they write because they're not all alone. They're hanging out with people, characters they really care about, but no one else is that interested. And intuitive writers tend to know that, but they don't know what to do about it. So everyone's trying to write the best scripts they can. So knowingly or unknowingly, we play to our strengths and hide our weaknesses. So if it's like tennis, I'm really good with my forehand, but I'm weak with my backhand. I keep trying to play forehand and hide my backhand. So conceptual writers, they get conceptually stronger and stronger and intuitively weaker and weaker. And intuitive writers is the opposite. So as you know, the key is to take your strong suit and tie it behind your back. So if you're a conceptual writer, I'll make you work intuitively to get stronger and stronger intuitively because it's a very silly metaphor, but I like it. If you are trying to drink milkshake using a hammer instead of a straw, it's not going to work. And if you're trying to pound nails into a wall with a drinking straw, it's not going to work. So conceptual writers, let's say they have a hammer. That's the conceptual brain. It's really good at pounding nails, but you can't drink a milkshake. So conceptual writers, the way they try to get better at characters and dialogue is they take classes or read books that give them conceptual skills about characters and dialogue, and it's just making it worse. You've got to learn how to put the hammer down and pick up the straw. And then it's so much easier. But that's really hard to do because the way the brain works is the conceptual and the intuitive sides can't be active at the same time. To access your intuitive side, you got to turn off your conceptual brain. Any of you listening, if you tend to think a lot and be in your head and you have anxiety and you stress about things, that's all your conceptual brain. And like when you get really stressed, like sometimes it's hard to let go of that. But when you go to sleep and you dream, your conceptual brain goes offline and your intuitive brain goes online. It can be a very evocative, emotional experience that you don't control. I teach people how to do that without, consciously without going to sleep.
The truth is, it's uncomfortable to learn new skills.
It's terrifying. The hardest part is to put down the hammer. And for intuitive writers, it's learning how to put down the straw and pick up the hammer. People hear about this and they're like, oh my God, you're talking about me. This sounds great. I can't wait to do this. They sign up for the workshop. And the first day when I come into the workshop, everyone is so excited. They're just so buzzing. And I'm like, 2 weeks from now, you're all going to hate me because everybody loves the promise of creative integration, but nobody actually understands how terrifying it was. And I'll just speak for myself because I did this work. I was a conceptual writer and I needed to do this work to get stronger at characters and dialogue. My conceptual brain, it was like, it's my armor. It makes me feel safe. Like I'm always terrified of writing something that people look at it and go, oh my God, this guy's a hack. This guy's a terrible writer. I lose my career. I lose everything. And my conceptual brain is there to protect me. That's how it feels. Now, it's not protecting me. It's actually hurting me, but it doesn't seem, so to write in a way where I'm just intuitively writing, just exploring, just let it come out and not even judging it in any way possible, just almost like a trance. My gosh, that was like, it felt impossible for like the first 6 weeks I was trying to do it, and I teach this stuff. When people finally come through the other end though, they look back and they go, I made this so much harder than it had to be. It's actually not very hard. I'm like, yes, You made it really, really hard. I know, I did too. It's scary. So you're on the monkey bar and you're a kid. And let's say you're on this bar and you feel if you drop, you're going to die. Let's just say you feel like you're going to die. And you're trying to get to the next bar. That is like improving as a writer, like right, becoming a better writer. But you won't let go of this bar until you have this bar in hand, because if you drop, you're going to die. And the thing with creative integration is you cannot get to this bar until you let go of this bar. And then they're like, but I can't do that because I'll die. And I'm like, no, you won't die. You think you'll die, but you won't die. And they're like, okay, I'll let go. Okay, I let go. They didn't, but they think they did. And like, I can't find the bar. And I'm like, well, look up. And they're like, oh yeah, I didn't let go. It's really hard to let go of the way we've always done it and the way that feels safe and the way that protects us and the way we want to do it. And that's really, really hard. But at that moment when people will capitulate, they suddenly can find the next bar. And then it's just so amazing. They'll come through the other end and then they'll call me and they'll be like, so my agent just read the script, or my manager, or my husband, my wife, my writing group. And they said, and they always say the same thing. They read my script and they said, I don't believe you wrote this script. No offense. I love you. I love your writing, but you don't write characters like this. Or your stories are not like, I'm sorry, but this is an amazing story. I mean, I love your characters and dialogue and I love you, but this is like a real story. It's amazing. Who wrote it? I don't believe you wrote it. And, it's such, I know what it feels like as a writer to go through that process and hear it. I don't do the work. The writers do it. I love guiding them through the process.
And building on this really strong foundation of understanding these two parts of how you work as a writer and building out your strengths in both, you add into that and you're teaching the idea of story design, which is so helpful. What does story design mean in how you teach it, and how does a writer design their story, and what impact can this have when writers understand this?
Story design is how I was taught, and by an Academy Award winning producer. And over time, I've come to see like, oh, the best writers, they do story design. It's very different from how most people operate. So it doesn't start with an outline. An outline mentality is, I know, and all your listeners know, like, okay, so first scene, second scene, this happens and this happens and this happens and this happens. And everything will be interesting and ultimately add up to something greater than the sum of the parts, or please God, let it do that. And it really doesn't. The best writers don't start that way. They might outline at some point in the process, but they start with their objectives. So what is their story objectives? Why are they writing this? Why does this matter to them? What do they want people to get out of this? And then how are they going to get people engaged and keep people engaged? They're going to have objectives. And they map out those objectives. They don't know how they're going to accomplish them yet, but they map out the objectives. Then they find the events that create those objectives, and then they find the way to make those events really interesting using the story tools. And it might sound simple, and it is simple, but it is radically different, easier, and far more successful. So instead of having interesting events, and just hoping it adds up to something, you actually start with the underneath part. If you remember, we started talking about the top and the bottom. So you start with the underneath part and you figure out like, what is meaningful about this to you? And what is it that you want us to experience? You really create an experience map of an audience, either a reader or a viewer. And then there's a technique, which we don't have time to go into the details, but there's a technique to find the events that are going to give the reader or the viewer that experience. And then you make those events really compelling. Adolescence is top of mind, but one of the things that the writer creators really wanted in terms of experience is that there's obviously a really tragic upswing, and this was in the UK, but I think this is worldwide, of women being murdered by knives, which all murders are horrific, but to do it with a knife, to have to be that intimately close to the person, and who's capable of doing that. And then the shocking thing is, adolescent boys are murdering girls with knives at unprecedented apocalyptic levels in the UK. And I doubt it's just the UK. So this is horrific. What is going on here? And there's a lot of pieces, and obviously, like, we now have this generation of kids that grew up for the first time. They grew up in the world of their phones. Like, they're native to their phones, Instagram and that ecology. And yes, there's a lot of social pressure and bullying, and it affects kids' brains, and all of that obviously is one of the pieces of the puzzle. But everyone talks about, parenting. Well, yes, young kids now are growing up in a different world than my generation did. But at this end of the day, like, isn't it the parent's responsibility to monitor the kid and know what's going on with the kid and be there as the parent, take the phone away, and all of that. And one of the things that was really important to them they wanted the audience to experience is, they wanted the audience to realize something. I don't have a young boy, so I'm watching the show. What they wanted, what they explicitly were trying to achieve in their experience map, is it worked with me, which is when this happened, I was like, oh my God, I never thought about that, which is there are parents who are very vigilant and are very much monitoring what's going on, but they don't understand what's going on because it's all being done in a different language and symbols and emojis that they can't decipher. So like my dad obviously grew up in a different time than I grew up, but if he went into my room and saw what I was doing, or went in when I was out and looked at my papers or whatever, he'd understand what was going on in but you could be very vigilant and have no understanding of what your child, it's like your child goes off into a world that you don't understand, and you can monitor, but you actually just you have no understanding of what's going on with that kid. That's one of the things they wanted people to experience. Now they have to figure out a way of making that part of the plot in a way that's engaging and impactful. And they did that. So basically, you start with what you want people to experience, and you use that to find your plot. For reasons that we don't need to go into, they didn't want to do a true life story. They wanted to make it fictional, and they knew it was going to be the story of a 14-year-old boy who stabbed a 14-year-old girl. But if you think about it, there's lots of scenarios, lots of different boys and girls in scenarios, and different parents. There's so many ways you could have go about it. And instead of trying to come up with like, what's the most interesting way to start this and the concept, they started, why are we writing this? Why do we want people to experience this? Why does this have to be made? And what do we want people to experience at the end and in the middle? Now let's cast the characters and the motivation, like why did the kid do it? When does the kid do it? How is it discovered? Like all of that is there to serve the experience. And as you know, from the executive perspective, and again, I'm just going to speak from an American perspective, it's almost impossible to sell a TV pilot or project without being in a room and answering some questions. And one of the questions that people are going to want to know is, why did you write this? Well, because everyone's looking for something. It can't just be entertaining. There's too much entertaining stuff with all of the platforms, and there's so much competition outside of TV shows. There's so much competition for our attention, right? They're looking for something that's entertaining, but more. So they want to know, like, is there something that really matters to you? There's something really important to you, like this really matters. They want to know that. And then they're trying to figure out, like, and this is something I'm always because I do a lot of helping writers before they go into a room, I'm always like, even if they don't explicitly ask you this, you need to answer, why does this story need to be told right now? And if it's like, well, no one's had this idea of doing a horror film like this, and it's really interesting. Yes, but that doesn't mean it has to get made right now. Sean Baker had a very clear reason why Nora had to be made right now. And so did the writers of Adolescence and so on and so forth. So start with that and work backwards to the plot. It's so much easier, it's so much faster, and it's so much more successful.
It's so much more powerful, and it's so audience focused.
Right. That's the point of a story, right?
Yeah. It really is. Gosh, I love the way you talk about story, Corey. It's so great. And, again, it's so practical, but it really does make a difference to how shows get made and what shows get made if you can crack this stuff. I remember you saying one day, which is in the realm of what you're talking about, that writing is an energy transfer business. It has become one of my favorite quotes, but I'd love to hear in your words what you mean by that.
You go first. Why is it one of your favorite quotes?
Because I guess exactly what you're saying, like if there's love on the page, like you feel it. We can feel when a writer has phoned it in because there's something that happens that doesn't come off the page. You haven't defined that experience for the audience enough.
Yeah.
And you haven't felt it.
Yes. And I totally agree. But in addition to the phoning in, there's a lot of advice out there of like, if you want to be a writer, you have to write every day. And it's about gluing your rear end and getting the pages done. It's really bad advice. If you're not into what you're writing and you just force yourself to write pages, You got a lot of pages done, but we're not going to be in a reading it. It's your job to be enthralled with what you're writing. And on those rare days, when no matter what you do, you just don't feel like writing, then you go to plan B, which is glue your rear end down and write pages. Like that's your plan B, but for too many writers, it's your plan A. And what isn't being taught is what is your relationship to writing? And if you have stress and anxiety and procrastination, and you have a complicated relationship with writing, we're going to have a complicated relationship with reading your writing in not a good way. So, the writers that I see who are successful, I'm not saying they're all rainbows and puppies, but and it doesn't mean you have to enjoy what you're writing, but it means you have to feel like you have to be writing it. And if you don't feel like this is what I have to be doing right now, something's wrong. And don't just plow forward. Try to figure out what's wrong and if you can adjust it and what you can do. And I recently brought in some very high level execs to a UCLA class that I teach. And it's like you can tell when you read something and you're like, they had to write this, you can tell. You could tell. And you can tell when they are doing it because they think they're going to sell it. They think it's commercial, or they were foreseeing themselves, but they weren't really into it, or they're phoning it in, or whatever it is. Your relationship with writing really, really matters. And so it's really important that you try to figure out maybe where you have a damage in that relationship and how you can fix it or heal it.
What can you see changing in the industry right now, and what impact is that having on writers? What does it mean for writers?
I've actually been doing a lot of work up in Toronto because they had a protected entertainment ecosystem for TV, and they kind of now realizing with the platforms and the laws changing, like they can't really protect it anymore. And I know a lot of the big agents and producers up there are kind of nervous because there's very talented writers up there who they're capable, but they've trained themselves and they are writing at a level that's very successful in the protected domestic industry, but not when it competes against. I mean, the thing about America is, well, at least until recently, who knows what the future looks like. Most of the best and the brightest want to come here. So it's not like American writers are better than, or directors are better than Australian. It's just the best of the Aussie writers and directors often want to come and work in Hollywood because they want to work with the best. And we have bigger budgets and you can do more things and you can make more money. So, when I say American, I'm not talking about American born. I'm just talking about the American industry. So the American industry, it was a very stable industry for 50 years. And then you had a small group of players that had a monopoly on distribution, both on the feature side and on the TV side. And in the TV side, they just had a model of comfort food TV that everyone kind of likes. Nobody loves, nobody hates. It's just everyone's fine with it. Put a star, maybe a fun premise, and we can sell a lot of commercials because it was just about getting the most people watching. And then the streaming platforms came and Wall Street went crazy and just gave them unlimited amounts of money and say you don't turn a profit, just grow viewerships. And that was just a crazy 8 years where they let the best people do whatever they wanted to do with no supervision, very little notes. There was just tremendous amounts of money, production, and demand for writers. And writers who were struggling to have a career were suddenly working quite easily. It was a game of musical chairs, and suddenly there was 10 times more chairs than ever. The problem, and I warned everyone who would listen, the music's going to stop at some point. This is not sustainable. And we're going to go back to normal number of chairs. So you're working and making money. That's great, but keep working on your skill set because when the music stops, it's the weaker people that lose their jobs first. The music stopped for a variety of reasons. God, we've had perfect storm of Wall Street pulling back the money, COVID, pandemic, strikes, and now political instability and economic instability that seems to change every day. And suddenly America's relationship with the world is, I don't know, there's a whole bunch of people who used to love us, but now hate us, or at least hate the politics. Everything really changed in, let's say, 2009. So if you look at 2008, let's say this is like the number of writers that were working in Hollywood, TV, and features. And then after 2009 on, let's say it was like this. We're now like here. Like it's still much better than the normal, but it is definitely down from the the go-go years. And the go-go years will never come back because it was just this weird time where there was unlimited amount of money, and Netflix and Amazon and then Apple and Hulu just they didn't care. They literally couldn't spend their budgets, which is crazy. They would come and like take a student from my class and say, "We're going to bring you in and we're going to help you figure out what you can sell to us." That's insane. I feel sorry for the writers that came of age during those 10 years because they just think that's normal. And now they're the ones saying, it's the Great Depression, everything's horrible. And it's like, no, you normalize what was never normal. So that's the big picture. And what's happened is the streamers, they need to show a profit, but their model is based on lots and lots of product. So what they've been trying to do is create lots of product for less money, which is basically going back to the old network model that they destroyed, which is those paint by number, a bunch of monkeys could write the script type of things, not spend a lot of money on it, and also just get as much foreign content as they can because that's a lot less expensive to buy and do more reality. And guess what? It's not working. People are not going to go back to that. It's like if you suddenly give someone the ability to eat really great food, they're not going to go back to like the junk food. People who watch TV shows and movies are so educated and they've seen so much. They know what an original great story is and what isn't. So it's not working. I think what's going to happen, this is a prediction, but I think we're seeing it, is the platforms are going to lose their sort of monopoly. And, over the next 5 to 7 years, I think there's going to be more and more smaller distribution options to get people's work out. I think there's going to be more opportunities for writers. We're no longer doing broadcasting. We're no longer trying to create content that appeals to everybody. We're trying to create content that a small number of people will love and be loyal and keep watching, and other people will think it's terrible, and it'll offend them or annoy them. It's going to be a great time to be a storyteller. I think you won't be making as much money. You won't be making ridiculous life-changing money, but you still be making really good money. So I think it's in flux, and it's interesting to see how it plays out. But we're seeing for the first time since the 1990s that the feature films, are looking for original scripts, comic book movies, Star Wars movies, and remakes. They'll always do some of that, but they're now buying original content and they're making original movies, even, in the summer. That's going to accelerate. And same thing with TV. But the complaint that I hear all the time from the industry is there aren't enough talented writers. And they're really concerned about this newer generation of writers that maybe because of how they grew up and the messages they got. In America, at least, there's a generation who maybe it hasn't yet dawned on them how hard you have to work at something if you really want to be special at it. And you weren't just born special at everything. You're born a unique and special person, and the people who love you, and you're an amazing person, and you don't have to achieve writing greatness to be a special person. But if you want to be special at something like writing, just like sports, you're going to have to work your little ass off. And maybe they haven't fully accepted that yet. But the industry is like, well, they put it in a little more harsher terms. Like, what's wrong with this next generation of storytellers? They just sort of feel entitled.
The best way to have a career in this industry is really just to be really great at whatever you do.
Yes, and know that means where are my strengths, where are my weaknesses, how to turn weaknesses into strengths, and put the work in every day to get better. Just like an athlete, right? I mean, if you were, I don't know, a hockey player, a rugby player, a baseball player, whatever, and you want to make a career out of it, even in the off season, like, you're practicing, you're staying in shape, you're drilling, you're training, and you're looking at the tape from last year, even if you were a top on your team, and you're like, okay, where can I improve? And then the off season is attacking that. That's because you're an athlete and you want to compete. You want to make your living competing against the best of the best. Well, it's the same thing with storytelling. And I think in a lot of countries like Canada and I think Australia, there's going to be more international competition coming out of Hollywood. And I'll tell you, the competition, there are people who are willing to do whatever it takes and they're going to get up. No one's going to outwork them. And they're really serious about it. And I think that's what it's going to take. I have people come to me and they're like, I want to write Honora. I want to write, Moonlight. I want to write the next Breaking Bad. I want to write, 30 Rock. And it's like, well, you can't because A, it's already been written, but B, you can't write like Sean Baker and you can't write like Tina Fey. You accept that. You'll never be able to. But Sean Baker and Tina Fey can never write like you. And they can never do what you can do. So what you have to do is become the best version of you as a writer and then have the courage to tell those stories that only you can tell because that's all you have. And that's the only way you're going to compete. And you're not really competing with anyone else. You just got to become the best writer you can be and write what you and only you could write and let the chips fall where they fall. That's the game.
So beautifully put. So that dovetails nicely into the question of what is the best piece of advice you could give a writer right now?
I would ask them to think about if they had a friend who wanted to compete as an Olympic runner, and that friend would have to get up and train and sacrifice a lot. But let's say that friend hated training, hated all of that. Maybe they shouldn't be a marathon runner. Maybe they should try to find something else to compete in. It's a lot of work, but you're allowed to love it. And you're allowed to love the process and the journey. And the cool thing is, if you're really training yourself the right way to become a better writer, one of the things that's going to happen is you'll become a better person. What I tell my writers is I can't guarantee you'll have success, but I guarantee you'll give yourself the best possible chance of success. And the worst thing that'll happen is you'll walk away a better person.
Pretty good outcome.
The world needs more better people.
Come for the writing, stay for the personal growth. Corey, I just really love the way you talk about writing. It's like I said at the beginning, it absolutely changed what I understood great writing to be. And, I'm not a writer, I'm development, I'm producer, but having those skills, understanding story, and then actually within your course, understanding how things could be fixed. It took the blinders off that and gave me the craft to actually understand where things weren't working and how I could support writers for my role in that. I always finish my podcast with asking guests to pitch an idea or suggestion that they think would make the industry better for all of us.
So here's my crazy idea that I think the industry should embrace and insist on cross-training. A writer should have to work as a development executive. Development executives have to work as a writer where they're getting notes and getting paid. And I think everyone needs to cross-train because, I worked for 11 years as a feature screenwriter, hung out with writers and complained, just like every writer complains about the things I complain about. But, now I'm very close with producers and agents and managers. And it's like agents complain about writers and producers complain about writers because sometimes they don't really understand what the writer's going through, and writers complain all the time about agents and executives because we don't always know what they're going through. And I actually think if people lived in each other's shoes for 6 months, that not only would the creative development process be so much better, I think we would create better product. I pitched this and everyone just gives me this strange look. I hold very little hope in my pitch, but that's my pitch.
I love that. And, when I went in to be a commissioner, I'd been a producer for nearly 10 years. And so having that understanding of how hard it was to make things or what it took for a producer and writer to come in and pitch me, I really found so helpful. And I do think that is an issue that people get stuck in those executive roles that don't know how hard it is to make things. So I'm with you. Let's cross-train. Thanks, Corey. Appreciate your time. We Interrupt This broadcast is recorded on the unceded lands of the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation and the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains, and we acknowledge them as the traditional custodians and first storytellers of these regions. Always was, always will be.